Have you ever wondered how a law about clean air actually turns into the specific pollution cap on a factory down the street? You know? Or how a big Food Safety Act becomes that detailed list of ingredients you see on a label? Well, that is the hidden world of federal rulemaking. And believe me, it affects pretty much every part of our lives. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the official rulebook for rules.
Okay, so we all know Congress writes the laws of the land, but a law is often just a starting point, right? It's a big idea. So think about it. Who's the one that translates a broad concept like cleaner air into the exact legally binding pollution limits for a power plant? That is the crucial question we are digging into.
And the answer? It lies in the executive branch. More specifically, with federal agencies. They're the ones tasked with taking these general goals that Congress sets and then filling in all the critical, real-world details.
So, for instance, Congress passed the Clean Air Act. That basically directed the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to set standards for pollutants that could endanger public health. Or take the Tobacco Control Act, which authorized the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to create standards for tobacco products. You see the pattern? Congress provides the what, and it's up to the agencies to figure out the how. They write the playbook.
And when an agency writes down these details, they're creating what's called a rule. Now, don't let that simple name fool you. A rule isn't just a suggestion. Oh no, it is a legally binding command that carries the full force and effect of law. So you're probably thinking, with agencies holding this much power, there has to be some kind of rule book for making the rules themselves, right? Well, you'd be absolutely right. And it's all governed by one really critical piece of legislation. It's called the Administrative Procedure Act, or APA for short. And you can really think of it as the constitution for the entire administrative side of government. It's the official instruction manual that lays out the basic, fundamental procedures that all federal agencies have to follow when they create, change, or even get rid of a rule. Now, the APA didn't just appear out of thin air. It was actually born from a huge debate back in the 1930s and 40s. See, the New Deal created all these powerful new agencies, and a lot of people started to worry about this new, unelected power. After about a decade of political back and forth, which even included a presidential veto of a stricter bill, the APA was finally passed in 1946. It was this grand compromise to make sure agency power was structured, transparent, and had checks and balances. So how does this rulebook actually work in practice? Well, the most common process, the one used for the vast majority of rules, is known as notice and comment rulemaking. The whole thing really boils down to 3 key steps. First, an agency has to give public notice. Usually they do this by publishing their proposal in a daily journal called the Federal Register. Second, and this part is absolutely crucial, it has to give you, the public, a chance to comment, to submit arguments, data, your opinions, all of it. And finally, the agency has to actually consider all that feedback before it issues a final binding rule. The whole system is designed to be transparent and let people participate. And let me tell you, the Supreme Court has made one thing crystal clear. There are no shortcuts here. If a new administration wants to get rid of a rule from a previous one, they can't just tear it up. Nope, they have to follow the exact same rigorous notice and comment process to repeal it as it took to create it in the first place. But wait, what happens if an agency follows the process, but its final decision just seems completely irrational? Well, that's where the courts come in. They act as the ultimate check, taking what's famously known as a hard look at what the agency did. The legal standard a court uses is whether the agency's action was arbitrary and capricious. I know, it's a fancy legal term, but it basically just means the agency acted willfully and unreasonably, completely ignoring the facts. It's the court's way of asking, hey, did you actually do your homework here, or did you just make a random decision off the cuff? This whole idea was really cemented in a famous Supreme Court case that was all about airbags. The Reagan administration tried to quickly get rid of a rule that required passive restraints in cars, and the court stepped in. In that case, Motor Vehicle Manufacturers Association v. State Farm, the justices laid out exactly what it means to take a hard look at an agency's reasoning. So what does a judge actually look for? This right here is pretty much the checklist from that State Farm decision. Did the agency ignore a huge part of the problem? Is their explanation completely contradicted by the evidence they gathered? Is the final decision just so out there that you can't chalk it up to a simple difference of expert opinion? If the answer to any of these is yes, then boom, the rule can be struck down. For decades, this system, agencies making rules, courts taking a hard look, has been the standard. But right now, at this very moment, we are in the middle of a massive, fundamental shift in how this all works.
In 2024, the Supreme Court did something truly monumental. It overturned a 40-year-old precedent known as Chevron deference. And listen, this isn't just some small tweak. This is a complete rewrite of the relationship between government agencies and the courts. So let's break down what this actually means. Under the old Chevron rule, if a law was a little vague, courts had to defer to an agency's interpretation as long as it was reasonable. But now, after the Loper-Bright case, that's gone. Poof! Courts no longer have to defer. Instead, a judge has to decide for themselves what the single best interpretation of that ambiguous law is. So the crucial takeaway here is this: power has shifted. It's moving away from the scientists, the economists, the engineers, the subject matter experts inside the agencies, and it's moving toward federal judges, who are legal generalists. Now, this doesn't mean that agency expertise is suddenly irrelevant. The Supreme Court was clear that judges can, and probably should, be guided by what an agency thinks, but only if the agency makes a really persuasive case. Their reasoning has to be thorough, consistent, and just plain compelling enough to convince a judge that their interpretation is in fact the best one. And that leaves us with a huge question for the future. In this new era, judges have a much, much bigger role in shaping the final rules on everything, from the environment to healthcare to the economy. So the real question is, what does this massive shift in power mean for the regulations that affect you and the issues that you care about most? That is the new reality of the Rulebook for rules.